Hi, I'm M.
And my name is Bea.
And this is
Fangirls Anonymous. A quick warning, this podcast is not for kids.
We get into some pretty explicit stuff.
But if you're still with us and into that, welcome.
Welcome to the second week of Tropetober! Oh, that was terrible.
Yeah, a little bit weaker than last week. It's okay. We'll get there.
You want me to try again?
If you'd like, okay. I suppose.
Okay, I'm gonna have to breathe deep for this.
That was a lot louder, for sure.
Yeah, sorry. Rip headphone users right now. Okay, so this week we are talking about the shambling corpses that, was a huge thing in like 2014 for some reason.
That's not a nice way to refer to all of the people who are reading until 4 a.m.
Oh, the shade of it all. Me.
We have all been the shambling corpse that read until 4 a.m. That one fic that was just so good.
I know. That's happened to me more than a fair few times, actually. It's definitely happened more than once. We're talking about zombie AUs today, which is super fun. They're in every fandom, but they're kind of rare, I would say. And Bea and I don't read them a lot. So we're not necessarily experts about this AU, but we've read some.
You probably learned a fair amount. I'm going to learn a fair amount here.
I did learn a fair amount about some interesting things. So let's get into it. Just like some fun backstory with even the word zombie I found online. I kind of wanted to know where it was because it sounds very, like it could somehow simultaneously sound very young, like from the 50s kind of word, but also very, very old. And it seemingly is very, very old, which is kind of crazy to me. According to lexico.com, it is of West African origin, and the first English recording of it was 1819. I don't know the first recording of it in West Africa, but it's a word to describe a snake god in the voodoo religion in West Africa, and when the people from West Africa were enslaved, they also brought their religion. So, by extension, they brought the term zombie, and in English-speaking countries, it turned into kind of the word to describe a shambling corpse or whatever with like no soul seemingly, and it was brought back to life through like supernatural or magical or mysterious means. Which, yes, I guess that is the definition. But there are also some fun random definitions that people also use the word zombie to describe. Like a slow-witted or a dumb person, usually describing somebody who has like sleep deprivation. Man, I'm such a zombie today. I didn't get any sleep last night. There's also a cocktail, which I have made because I was once a bartender. And it's gross. Don't drink it. But this is coming from somebody who loves scotch. So take that for what it's worth. It's also, I didn't know this until I researched it, but it also describes a computer that is controlled like from a different source without the owner's knowledge or consent of that control. So like, when you can like buy views on like these really shady sites for like YouTube videos or like Instagram followers or that kind of thing. That is just somebody taking control over somebody else's computer and using that computer as like a different IP address and watching the video on repeat or whatever. And then also, fun anti-capitalism streak here. A zombie bank is a bank that is insolvent but is able to continue being a bank because of government funding. Anyway, so as for fan fiction...
I'm really wanting to know about this AU that has to do with bankers that are in banks that are being propped up by the government. Like, I want this AU now. Tell us about that.
Actually, I really want an AU where one of the main characters is like the person that goes into banks to make sure that they're trying to not be a zombie bank anymore. Or like a pair of people.
And the love interest is a person who works in the bank that is super sleep deprived because they moonlight as someone who hijacks other people's computers.
And they have to do it at night because they work at the bank during the day.
And maybe the inspector person really likes going to bars and ordering
and getting zombies.
Yes. Perfect.
Okay. If anybody's listening to this fic, if anybody's listening to this episode and is a writer, a fic writer, please write that. and I really want you to make it steric because it feels very steric-y.
And don't forget that we also need to actually involve the shambling undead somewhere in here. Don't know where it's going to fit, but
I think the very beginning of the fic, one of the two people, either Derek or Styles, should be watching a horror movie in their hotel room or something. Probably Styles, because he's going to be the guy that goes in and, like, he's going to be, like, the investigator. Because Derek always looks sleep deprived.
Yes, but that also means that he has enough computer savvy to take over other people's computers. I'm not sure if I believe that. I feel like we've gotten off topic here.
We really have, sorry. Anyway, so for the zombie AU, specifically in fic, it is almost always like the breakout of an illness that creates zombies. And the two main characters are almost always not zombies who are shipped together. Or, I mean, if it's Jen, it can be a group of people fighting off zombies. But two characters that are shipped together are almost always not zombies, and they're fighting off zombies, basically. It is almost never about the main characters, one of them or both, becoming zombies. It's basically an apocalypse AU, but it's not like people are just automatically dying from an illness or an atom bomb went off or some other catastrophe happened. It's specifically zombies, but it's in the same vein as an apocalyptic AU. I would say it's slightly spicier than like an apocalypse AU because there's the constant possible assault of dangerous beings right around the corner. And that's like prime hurt comfort territory, in my opinion, for that kind of stuff. Like, it's okay, babe, we'll get through this kind of conversations. They're interesting AUs. Bea and I have not read a lot of them, but from what we have read, it really depends on the fandom, in my opinion, whether it is a little bit cracky, a little bit not. We'll get into that. But there are a lot of really specific tropes that end up getting involved in these AUs. One of them, like I said earlier, is hurt comfort. So much hurt comfort. I'm a whore for hurt comfort. Everybody who listens to this podcast knows this by now. But if there is a constant threat of mauling and death around every corner, I feel like you have to get your kicks where you can. Emotional stability from another person kind of thing. Super fun. There's also always kind of this air of self-sacrifice that could conceivably always happen around every corner as well. I love you so much that I'm willing to throw myself into a horde of zombies to protect you kind of self-sacrifice.
Nothing says love quite like being willing to commit massive acts of self-sacrificing violence.
Yummy. Then there's also the threat of major character death. The possibility of it actually being major character death, and then the possibility of a character thinking that somebody has died but then they aren't, or the character thinking that somebody is fine but that they're actually dead. Ooh, the angst.
Yeah, I would come put out there that I actually think that the single angstiest scenario in this is actually they definitely died, but then they undied. Maximum angst. I've lost you, but now I have to kill you sort of a thing.
That is the saddest thing I've ever heard. I never want to read that. That is maximum angst. Oof. No, maximum angst is if right after the government flies and they're like, we have a cure! Stop shooting! That reminds me of a movie I watched when I was like 13, and it was about these two people who were idiots that walked into the Grand Canyon and their guide died, and these wolves were following them, which wouldn't even happen. Wolves don't follow people like that. But these wolves kept following them, and this guy like hurt his leg and stuff, and like at the very end of the movie, spoiler alert for a weird movie, at the end of the movie, he's just like, babe, I'm dying. These wolves are about to attack us, just kill me. And she does. And then right after she kills him, helicopters fly in and they're like, we found you, you're safe. And she's like, my world is crumbling around me.
I'm pretty sure that was basically an episode of The Twilight Zone.
Yeah, but it was a whole movie and it was really poorly done. I don't know why my whole family watched all the way through it. Anyway, another trope is kind of a conversation about moral and ethical gray areas. Are you actually killing people? Or are you just trying to survive? Or, like, even if they are not technically human anymore, they're still beings that are just trying to exist. But, like, your life is worth more than theirs. Like, moral, ethical gray areas abound in these kinds of stories. Especially, I mean, even in, like, movies, you know, syndicated films. So that's super fun to talk about. And then I think the biggest trope within specifically fan fiction and talking about zombies, is love blossoming in hard times. Whenever I think of that phrase, there's like a little rainbow that goes into my head, like, love blossoming in hard times. Basically, in an apocalyptic situation, which, if there are zombies and it's not contained, then yes, that's an apocalyptic situation. And you fall in love with somebody? First of all, that's fun fiction. Second of all, rough. Fun and rough at the same time. Like, you know what's going to happen. I mean, when you're shipping two people in a zombie AU, either one of them dies or the zombies stop eventually, or there's a cure, or somehow they both go on an island and like survive and live a lovely life together. But like, it's an apocalypse. Like, somebody's probably going to die. And it's a lot of angst. There's just a lot of angst.
Yeah.
In these.
Although I think it's interesting, at least from my limited experience, to note that, well, fan fiction does sometimes pull tropes from mainstream fiction. Most of the time they get kind of tweaked, especially in queer spaces. They tend to be sort of adjusted to fit better. So, for example, let's take the Titanic, when it immigrates into fandom space and becomes a trope. So you get your Titanic AUs. A lot of times, especially in a queer space, you sort of tweak it a little bit to fit. So in the case of doing, say, a Good Omens Titanic, very rarely do you see a fic where somebody really digs into the research and has historical queer themes and talks about homophobia and makes that a major theme of this already sort of planned out formula of a story. They just sort of are like, and it's a queer romance and nobody thinks about it too hard.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's funny though, I am actually betaing a Titanic and Luke fic right now, and one of the main themes that my author is talking about is it's like all of the third class passengers are all for Din and Luke being together, but a lot of the first class passengers are not. So we do talk about that a lot in the story, but I completely agree with you. Most fic tends to utilize the structure and scaffolding of canon, but without the historical importance of queer relationships and understanding at the time.
They live in a better, happier, brighter world where it isn't of consequence.
Any fic can be an AU, as long as you try hard enough. Any story can be an AU.
And that's a fairly specific, narrow example, but a lot of tropes sort of go through a sort of metamorphosis like that, where elements that don't fit as well in the fanish space get moved around a bit. And
what's fun about zombie AUs is that you don't really need to talk about that stuff, though.
No.
You know?
In fact, I would argue that zombie AUs are weirdly pure in that respect. Like, you don't really have to translate. They just exist as a setting and a story type in fandom. You could take a fandom zombie AU and you could change out the characters and stick it in The Walking Dead and it would work, or vice versa. There's no translation or tweaking. It just works, which is so weird.
Like, I've seen fic where it's the supernatural characters in the Walking Dead world, but like they meet up with Rick Grimes and his group of people. It just works sometimes to have like these two groups of people. I'm pretty sure I've seen a Teen Wolf one too. But yeah, it's interesting how apocalyptic, but I would also say maybe specifically zombie AUs are very much, like you said, pure in the fact that like all bets are off. Society has collapsed. There is danger around every tree and corner. Who gives a shit about whether you like having sex with a woman or a man or a non-binary person? You know, like it doesn't matter anymore. And I kind of like that for fic generally. In my opinion, the only trouble is the zombies are kind of boring. The only thing they do is for narrative structure. It's not for anything. It doesn't help the narrative go forward in any way, really.
Yeah, that is, I think, one of the weaknesses of zombie AUs is because they are, at their heart, very simple in what you need to form a zombie AU. Yes. A lot of times, the actual zombies or even the actual disaster are thematically very weak. They don't provide a whole lot to the narrative.
I think that zombie AUs, in essence, are just character analyses, which, in my opinion, fan fiction is just character analysis. So it works within fanfiction circles, but I think the reason why it's not as prolific as, say, a coffee shop AU is because zombies are slightly boring.
And possibly because if you're going into a coffee shop AU, I'm sure they exist, but I don't think there are very many coffee shop AUs that have like a bad ending.
Yeah.
With zombies, you've got actually a decent chance of having a bad end.
Yeah, you do. I'd have to read more zombie fic in order for me to say this, but it feels like there's like a 50-50 chance of it not ending well. I could be totally wrong. Fanfic does tend to be a little bit more. And then everybody lived happily ever after at the end of the story. So it's definitely a kind of middle of the road AU in my opinion. It's interesting if the author is really able to get to the essence of what the characters are and their motivations. And, you know, once they calm down a bit, oh shit, there's another zombie, you know. And then the moral and ethical implications of, you know, shooting the zombies if you know them. If you knew them in the past life or whatever, that's fun. But it's not necessarily an AU that I tend to gravitate toward.
Same. It has some nice built-in stakes that are easy to play with or escalate as you need within the story, but I find them to be relatively goal-less. Like, what does your character want? They want to survive. Okay, well, besides that, what else do they want? They want to fall in love. Okay, but what else do they want? And a lot of times authors sort of don't answer that question, and it leaves me a bit like, well, you've filled the very bottom of the pyramid of their needs. I think that they can strive for better.
A lot of times, it's kind of like Mad Max Fury Road, where they're just trying to find a better place. But then also other times it's like, take for example, I think I saw one when I was researching this. It was a supernatural fic, and Dean comes across Cass just like in the apocalypse, basically. Cass doesn't really have a goal, but Dean has to get to Sam. Sam was at school, and like Sam promised Dean that Sam would stay at the school, so Dean is trying to travel across the country to get to Sam at his school. And I like that. I really like that idea. But then what are they going to do when they find Sam? I didn't read it. I don't know if it's good or not. I will link it if you are interested in reading it. But yeah, I think the reason why it's not as prolific is because it's goalless. You're right. So a lot of the AUs, zombie AUs, tend to be in fandoms that are more like intense, I would say, which I think is interesting. But like, if there isn't already a modicum amount of intensity in the canon, then I would think it would just be a little bit cracky if there's just randomly a zombie AU. Think of like a Law and Order zombie AU. What does that even look like? You know, that sounds cracky to me.
I would have put out there Miraculous Ladybug, except for there was a canonical temporary zombie apocalypse, so I can't even classify that as crack. It's just canon.
Well, I don't think My Little Pony has had a zombie episode. I wouldn't put it past them, but I don't think that they have.
I'm pretty sure that fic exists.
I'm pretty sure it does too, but that's crack in that fandom, in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, like Supernatural Merlin and Teen Wolf. Those are definitely canons that's where zombie AUs kind of live. You know, that's what I would say. Like the two recs that I'm about to rec, they're both Merlin, and they're not cracky because, I mean, Merlin did have some undead people in it, but the ones I'm going to talk about are different. But it's just, it fits in with the tone of the show that they're from, or the movie, or the book. That's where they tend to sprout up, or to claw out of the earth. So, I guess we're into the area of talking about the fic that we have found and read. Let me get into Rec Corner! So, as I was researching this episode, I found a list on fanlore.org of notable zombie AU works, and I found A Cautionary Tale, in parentheses, the standalone remix, which is a remix of apparently another fic called The Standalone. Or Standalone, by Thisissirius. The summary is, the living dead are attacking Camelot, and Merlin doesn't know if his hands will ever be clean of blood. What a fun little summary. To me, it kind of feels just like a random, like 2010 3.5K gen fic on a list of notable works. And I don't know, it does have some kudos, and it does have some hits, but it's not like really popular. I haven't read so many Merlin fic that I can be like, yes, I'm really well versed in Merlin fic, but I have read some. And, you know, okay, I think that this fic is slightly brilliant because the way it's written, it's kind of like how a TV show would segment different shots within like TV show linear time because the writing is segmented. So it's not quite linear, but it's like TV show linear. Like, I really like that. It is a really cute fic. It's only 3.5K, so if you really like short fic, this is for you. There's also good angst and hurt comfort. There's also some kind of possible self-sacrificeness in it, but it's okay. Everything turns out fine. I just wish that the author had fleshed it out a bit more, because I do enjoy a longer fic. It is only 3.5K, but yeah, it's pretty good.
So my rec is Come With Me and Walk the Longest Mile by Devil Doll. And this one is in the Teen Wolf fandom. It's a little bit of an ambiguous AU. It's definitely not canon compliant at all. It is a story in which the zombie apocalypse has happened and Derek Hale is trying to get back somewhere safe. And he ends up picking up Styles, who's sort of going on his own way. And Styles wants specifically to go back to his hometown where he knows his dad is. So Derek, for kind of lack of anything better, ends up taking him along. And to be honest, the majority of this is just sort of a road trip with some get together. It's not super long, kind of a medium length fic, novella length. And it's interesting in that it's a zombie apocalypse and they have to deal with the usual zombie things. And it's a pretty normal sort of road trip, perilous road trip get together in that bad things happen. It brings them closer. So on and so on. The thing that is kind of interesting to me is it's sort of an Omegaverse AU. It's not super prevalent within the fic. In fact, the first half of it or so, I would argue that you mostly don't even know that it's Omegaverse, but it does end up being sort of a plot point in the middle with a little bit of import. It ends up all being happily ever after. So if you don't mind a little bit of Omegaverse in there just as sort of a spice, and you like a pretty solid zombie apocalypse road trip, it's a good fic.
And if you like Steric. That sounds really fun. I can't wait to read that. So my second fic is called Finding You by Gillo93. It is also another Merlin fic, but it's kind of on the opposite end of the Merlin fic I was talking about earlier. It is not strictly zombies. It's actually what Merlin calls like demons from hell. And they're kind of weird looking creatures the way they're described in the fic. But it's still an apocalyptic AU, and at any corner a terrifying creature can lunge out at you. Kind of fic. It's really sweet, but I don't know, like, to me it's zombie-y. And Bea and I were talking earlier this evening, and she was telling me that she considered it like 90% atmosphere. Perfect description. It is absolutely 90% atmosphere. The tone of it is very like, ooh, creepy. Everything's misty in your mind's eye when you're reading this, basically. So yeah, tone is also important when it comes to zombie AUs, in my opinion. If it's not creepy, then it's not particularly good, unless it's supposed to be funny and cracky. So yeah, there we have it. We've talked a lot about zombies. It is the middle of October, but we've talked a lot about zombies. Anyway, I think we're done.
Yeah, so I guess we'll see y'all next week on
Fangirls Anonymous. Goodbye.